It's been a long time since Pat Narduzzi did a press conference. Would have been great to have had him do some during the offseason at some point other than spring camp, but lo and behold, we didn't get that. What we did get, finally, was Pat Narduzzi speaking to me. Now, I mean, he did some TV things here and there. He big-timed us a little bit. But he finally did a proper press conference yesterday at the ACC Media Kickoff, the ACC Football Kickoff. Colloquially, that's a hard word to say. I write it a lot. I can see it a lot. I can hear it in my head as I'm reading it, but colloquially known as ACC Media Days. Try to say that. Colloquially. That's a tough one. Some folks call it ACC Media Days. The ACC prefers to call it their football kickoff. Either way, Pat Narduzzi spoke to the media yesterday. He wasn't the biggest star to speak at ACC football kickoff. I mean, Jim Phillips takes a little bit of the shine there, but Pat Narduzzi spoke to the media, and he doesn't talk often, and sometimes when he does, it kind of doesn't make sense, but there's often some interesting nuggets in there, and that was the case with Pat Narduzzi at the ACC football kickoff yesterday. So let's break down what Narduzzi said in Charlotte yesterday. 5 things from his comments that stood out to me, and we're going to talk about it here on the Morning Pitt. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Wednesday here on the Morning Pit on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You know what that means. It means tonight is the live Panther-Lair show. Will be live at 8:30 p.m. Me and Jim Hammett talking about Pitt sports with you right here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Look forward to that. It's always a lot of fun. Make sure you tune in with your comments and questions. We'll be previewing training camp, which I think actually starts next week. Not that Pitt has officially announced a starting date, because why would they do that and give us a give us a heads up on when to plan to be in the South Side, but we believe it starts next week. So there's lots of football to talk about, and also some basketball things with the basketball tournament team, the Zoo Crew making their march, with Bub Carrington being a all NBA Summer League second team selection. Lots of stuff going on in Pitt sports to talk about. We'll be breaking it all down tonight at 8:30, so make sure you tune in here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. If you're saying to me, Chris, there's no way I'm going to remember that show is happening tonight, I'd love to tune in and join the conversation and ask you guys comments and questions and all those kinds of things, but I'm totally going to forget. What should I do? Boom, hit the subscribe button, my friend, and you can turn on notifications, get an alert sent to your phone so you will never forget when we go live or when we post new content, like these daily Morning Pit videos or the stuff we'll have coming out of training camp, press conferences, interviews, practice highlights, all that coming out of training camp from the South Side, and it'll be right here at YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Of course, don't forget the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, for the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com. Get your Pitt fill there. All right, 5 things that stood out to me in Pat Narduzzi's comments yesterday when he held his time at the podium. Right off the bat, his first question, quote, from the questioner, according to the official ACC transcript, Pat, you're one of just a few coaches who have been at Pitt for 10 years. You're in your 10th season. Have you taken any time to reflect on your legacy and what you've been able to do for so long at Pitt? End quote of the question. Beginning quote of the answer. Narduzzi says, quote, you don't take much time as a coach to look and see, what you did in the past. You're kind of looking forward. I think, we're looking forward to 2024. It's not one of those years we had a year ago that you're saying, what kind of legacy do I have? I mean, I think you build your legacy year by year, and, we'll take each year one at a time. In 2024, we're looking forward to kind of bouncing back and getting where we need to be. And there's a lot of things you can say about Pat Narduzzi, all right? There's a lot of things you can say about his approach to football. There's a lot of things you can say about his approach to personnel management, either on the coaching side with his assistant coaches or on the player side with the players. You can say a lot about his way of dealing with the media. You can say a lot about his interpersonal skills. There's a lot that you can say, and a lot we could say, and there's a lot we have said, and then there's a lot that we've thought, and a lot that you've thought about Pat Narduzzi after observing him for the last 10 years. But the man is realistic, all right? And you might say, he might come out after a game and say, well, I have to look at the tape, and you might say, well, he's being unrealistic there, he's being insincere there. What is he talking about? He needs to look at the tape. Brief aside on that, to me, I've always thought when he says, we'll look at the tape, he's giving himself an opportunity to not speak emotionally in the aftermath of a game. Because usually it's like, what happened on this sack? What happened on this interception? What happened on this bad play that potentially cost you guys the game? I'll have to look at the tape. Because he doesn't want to throw, in that moment, he doesn't want to throw the player at fault under the bus, or he's trying to avoid doing it. And so he defaults to, I have to look at the tape just to give himself a sort of out to move on. He's basically saying, I don't want to answer that question right now. Coaches have a remarkable amount of recall of what happens on a play. Like, you could ask them some specific stuff, and like this, 2nd and 4 on the 3rd drive of the first half. This. Well, actually, I mean, they could tell you, well, the left guard was supposed to do this, and it ended up going the other way. He went the wrong way, or he took a step in the wrong direction. They have a pretty good idea of what happened in the game. So when he says, I have to look at the tape, it's just a way of getting out of it. All right, is ultimately what it comes down to. Just keep that in mind going forward. Now, that said, Narduzzi is pretty realistic when it comes to his position as head coach and, as this question asked, his legacy as head coach. I think he knew from the moment he walked off the field in Charlotte after the ACC championship game in December of 2021, and maybe while he was still on the field doing the post-game press conference, he knew they're only going to love me until I lose another game, and maybe even shorter than that. He knows. He knows that as great as that 2021 season was, when they lost to Georgia Tech, Louisville, and North Carolina in October of 2022, everybody wanted him fired again. He knows that. I think he's remarkably aware of that. And while I think he might lack self-awareness in certain areas, that's not one of them. And so he knows what kind of season he's coming off of. He knows that nobody gives a damn about him being here 10 years when they went 3-9 last season. He knows how he's viewed. I don't read the papers. Yeah, sure. That's why you make references all the time to everybody always wants to do this, or everybody says we should run the ball more, or everybody says we should do that or that. You're aware of all of it. You're aware of what's on social media. You're aware of what's in the papers, which is the internet. You're aware of what's being said on talk radio, and you're aware of what's being said on television on the rare occasion anybody actually talks about you on television. He's aware. And he's aware of what his status is right now. And so I think he probably thinks a legacy question on the heels of a 3-9 season is pretty funny. I was like, you really asking me what my legacy is right now? We went 3-9 last year. It is probably what went through his head. Now, he didn't answer the question that way, but he kind of did. He's like, what did he say? He said, it's not one of those years we had a year ago that you're saying, what kind of legacy do I have? Nobody's talking about legacy. He says, quote, I think you build your legacy year by year. And, we'll take it each year one at a time. I think he's pretty realistic about that. And I don't know. I think if you polled Pitt fans, hey, do you take Pat Narduzzi to have a certain level of self-awareness and realism when it comes to that kind of thing? I don't know if a lot of Pitt fans would say, yes, I do think he has those qualities or that awareness, that level of self-awareness. But I think he does. And I think, I think you see it in that quote too. He knows the score. He knows they won 3 games last year. And he knows that when you win 3 games, you're going to be under some fire. Not on the hot seat, but under some fire. Second thing. Asked a question about, see what the question was. Cade Bell and the offense and, the question was, could you describe what Cade Bell has brought to the table this offseason and how you've noticed the offense change? And he talks a lot about how the players have been working through it a lot in the OTAs, as he calls them, in spring ball in January, February when they were in the indoor facility and all this stuff. But he gets to a quote, and at one point, near the end of his quote, he says, quote, I'm a defensive guy, and I'm going to turn our offense loose. People wonder, as a defensive guy, do you put handcuffs? That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. In 9 seasons, I've never put handcuffs on an offensive coordinator. Well, hey, you have to do this. I have to do that. I let them go be them, and that's how I was coached. That's how Mark D'Antonio treated me when I was a defensive coordinator. He didn't micromanage. I don't ever micromanage what they call when they call it. That's on them, and I couldn't be more excited for Cade Bell and the entire offensive staff to get that thing rolling here come September. This is a point I've made, end quote. This is a point I've made a lot of times over the years. That Narduzzi really does take the hands-off approach with his offensive coordinators. And we hear about Narduzzi stuck in the Stone Age, or he wants an ancient offense or a Big Ten offense. Maybe with some of the coordinators he has hired. And I think when you see his offensive philosophy come through in the coaches he hires. That he hired Frank Cignetti for a certain reason, that he hired Sean Watson for a certain reason. We'll get into that in a second, because there's another quote that kind of ties into some of those things. But once he hires a guy that he believes can get the job done. And once he hires that guy, he steps back. He steps away from it and lets the offensive coordinator coach and run the offense as he sees fit. Narduzzi's input on the offense was in hiring the guy he hired. And then he steps back and lets him run it as he sees fit. And I think you look, over the years, there have been a number of times where the offensive coordinator wasn't doing what Pat Narduzzi would have preferred to have done, either throwing too much or not throwing enough. Comparing 2018 to 2021 in particular. But vice versa on those. Of course, those two being two seasons where you produced, the year they were throwing too much, they had a Biletnikoff Award winner and a Heisman Trophy finalist. The year where they were running too much, they had two 1,000-yard rushers. So, nevertheless, I've made this point countless times. I really think Narduzzi is hands-off with the offensive coordinator, sometimes to his detriment, as others have pointed out. There are times when Narduzzi should be more involved. And I think there have been moments where he has stepped in. 2020, I think mid-season, he stepped in and demanded a little more accountability out of the offensive staff and had a little more input with the offensive game plan. Last year, when the change was finally made from Phil Dracovic to Christian Bear, I think that was Narduzzi. Now, he may say that wasn't micromanaging, but he was very much stepping into the offensive room and saying, this needs to happen. It probably wasn't without some poking and prodding and nudging from some other people around the program, but he eventually stepped in and said this needs to happen. Now, again, he might not call that micromanaging. In his mind, micromanaging might be, I don't tell them what to call, which I think is true. But he still stepped in. Now, I think the best course of action going forward is to, again, be hands-off with the offensive coordinator. You hired the guy to do the job. Let him do the job. But since you are not someone who is brand new to the game of football, since you are someone who's spent their entire life around the game, coaching it at a pretty high level, you can probably feel free to opine a bit more than you have in the past. And maybe that was a lesson Pat Narduzzi said. Now, he says he's not going to have any handcuffs. He's not going to interfere. He's not going to jump in there. He says, in 9 seasons, I've never put handcuffs on an offensive coordinator. I agree about that. I don't think he's going to put handcuffs, but I think he can have some more input. But he doesn't micromanage it, which I believe. The next thing, a follow-up question about Cade Bell, was just basically asking, how long have you known Cade Bell? How long is he on your radar? Narduzzi says, quote, this is one of the, as part of his answer, he says, quote, this was one of those out-of-the-box hires. I think sometimes you go into hires and you're looking, okay, this is what I need. I needed a guy who was going to score points, who was going to have our offense have some enthusiasm. I needed a guy with energy. I needed someone that could be really creative in what he was doing offensively. I wanted that for our players. Every time Pat Narduzzi has hired a new offensive coordinator, he has done so with some very specific intentions. And it's interesting to look back over the last 10 years at what those intentions have been and how they've played out. He hired Jim Chaney as a guy with Power 5 coaching experience, had some success as a Power 5 coach, brought him in for a year, kind of butted heads. They went on about their way. He hired someone that he knew a little bit more, had a little bit more of a personal connection with Matt Canada. Canada leaves after 1 year, and he goes out and finds a coach, somebody he knows and trusts, but somebody he feels is going to be loyal, who's going to be willing to stick around for a few years. Too much instability is not a good thing. He knew the value of having a coordinator stay for 2 years. Just unfortunately, the coordinator he found was Sean Watson. After 2 years, he fires Watson because the passing game wasn't developing, because Kenny Pickett in the quarterback situation was not developing, and he goes out and hires a passing-specific quarterback developing coordinator in Mark Whipple. And for 3 years, Whipple is here calling a boatload of passing plays and ultimately developing Kenny Pickett into a Heisman Trophy finalist. They part ways. And Narduzzi goes out looking for not necessarily someone who's going to just run the ball all the time, but a little more balance. Someone with a history of a balanced offensive attack. And he hires Frank Cignetti to run a pro-style offense that balances the pass and the run. Now, obviously, it blew up. Wasn't really any good for 2 years running. Certainly this past season, it was an abject disaster for a lot of reasons. And so what did he go looking for this time? It's what Narduzzi said right there. I needed a guy who was going to score points, who was going to have our offense have some enthusiasm. I needed a guy with energy. I needed someone that could be really creative in what he was doing offensively. I wanted that for our players. All those things, score points, have some enthusiasm, energy, really creative. Every single one of those is a shot at Frank Cignetti. Every single one of those represents to Narduzzi the antithesis and opposite of Frank Cignetti and what Cignetti did and how Cignetti coached and how he operated as part of the program for 2 years. Every single one of those. And if you look at every hire Narduzzi has made, at least some element of that hire was an indictment on the previous hire. And maybe Narduzzi looks at it as an improvement on the previous hire, but I mean, it's something of an indictment on the previous offensive coordinator. Every single one that Narduzzi has hired has been an indictment on the previous offensive coordinator. Cade Bell, as a transition from Frank Cignetti, is no different. All right, question came up then in Narduzzi's press conference. Over the last 2 years, you're playing West Virginia again. First time since 2011. How important is it to have that series back? And Narduzzi says, quote, it's great to have that rivalry back. Pittsburgh, we embrace rivalries. Okay, we'd love to play Penn State if they would play us. If they won't play us, we'd love to play West Virginia as many times as we can play them. Regarding Penn State, blah, blah, blah. Not necessarily on the part of Narduzzi, because everything he said right there is absolutely true. What he said is absolutely accurate. We'd love to play Penn State if they would play us. If they won't play us, we'd love to play West Virginia as many times as we can. I have moved on from this thing. It would be great if there was a Pitt-Penn State series. I'm not pining for it anymore, though. It would be fantastic if it came back. Both fan bases would love it. It would be a great exhibition of college football. You know, it would be a great display of college football to its extremes of how great it can be truly be. But it's not happening, and it's probably not gonna happen. And so you know what? The Backyard Brawl is pretty fun in and of itself. Almost as fun, maybe just as much fun as the Pitt-Penn State games. Because I went to the Pitt-Penn State games, and they were exciting. All four of them were a riot. And both fan bases loved it. They ate it up. It was a great atmosphere. It was what college football should be. But you know what? So was the Backyard Brawl in 2022 and last year. And it's going to be again this year. It's going to be exactly what college football can be, because this is a great rivalry. The fan bases eat it up. It's catnip for the fan bases. And it is in the Pitt-Penn State series too. But if they want to be on their high horse about it, fine. Play this. Because this is just as good. Just as good. And it has been just as good the last 2 years. The last 2 years have been just as good in terms of the intensity of the rivalry. Just as good as that Penn State series 2016 to 2019. So screw them. Like, if they don't want to do it, there's a willing partner in Morgantown. And you know what? Shame on Pitt for trying to present themselves and hold themselves as being better than West Virginia for all those years. Because they're not, and they shouldn't be, and they should embrace the fun of it. It's fun. God forbid something happen in this sport just for the sake of being fun. And guess what? It's not just fun. It makes a whole ton of money because they sell a ton of tickets and a ton of concessions and make a ton of cash off of it. So look at this crazy equation. Fun plus money equals good. Keep doing it. Like, I don't care about Penn State. It would be great to have both of them on the schedule. As long as you have one of them each year, it's fine with me. And if it's West Virginia every year, great. Keep playing it. And as a follow-up, Narduzzi added this comment here. 2 years ago, we got them at home. They got us last year. They're coming back to Pittsburgh. Our kids couldn't be more excited. I think they got an idea, really, after 2 years, what a real rivalry game is. I think you need to lose a rivalry game to understand what it means to you. These guys might be able to talk about it a little bit. I think you have to lose one to know, okay, don't ever want to lose a rivalry game again. And I think that's kind of what we go into this game with in 24. Yeah. I think there's a little extra. Because, look, West Virginia had a little extra last year after the way the 2022 game went. You lose to your rival on the road on a tip drill pick six. You stand on the field, on your rival's field, and the place is shaking because of how crazy they're going about this pick six. That sticks with you. You take that home with you. You don't get on the bus. You don't forget about it. There's no 24-hour rule for an experience like that, and there was none for West Virginia last year. And ditto for Pitt going down there. There was no 24-hour rule for Pitt out of that backyard brawl, and there won't be a 24-hour rule for either one of these teams out of the game this year. Whoever loses is going to carry that with them for a year and look to get it back next year in Morgantown. And I can't wait. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be great. That game is going to be awesome, and win or lose, it's going to be a great environment. The place is going to be rocking. I can't wait. Week 3 is going to be great. All right, last one here. Question is, you get the West Virginia game back, but then you also host Cal and have to go to Dallas. Is that kind of all-encompassing of what college football and college sports is right now? That you still kind of get your little bit of a rivalry, but then you have to go halfway across the country. Narduzzi, quote, yeah, Cal, Stanford, and SMU are obviously in the ACC, so to me, I don't look like, it's some foreign game. We've embraced that. We're excited to have them in the conference, and our kids honestly are excited to travel to Dallas and eventually travel to California to go play. I've done that everywhere. So you can look at it as a non-conference game. I mean, it's nothing that's unusual in college football. It's just, whether it will be a non-conference game or a new conference as far as how things are moving around in the conference exchanges. So I think it's something that we embrace. Now, this is one of those quotes that Pat Narduzzi has sometimes. The words don't, like, you just listen to me say that, and you're probably like, what? I don't know what he means. I think the point, I've almost made this a weekly segment of taking a Narduzzi quote each week from his Monday press conference and sort of saying, like, okay, here's the quote. This may sound like a jumbled word salad, but at the heart of it, in the middle of it, there's a nugget of actually relevant concepts. And I think part of what Pat Narduzzi's getting at is that, let me bring the quote up again. I have to look at it to remind myself what I think he's saying here. He's basically saying yeah, our conference games are now taking us to Texas and California. So, you got to make those road trips, whether you're playing in the non-conference or in the conference. It doesn't matter. You just embrace it as a game on your schedule, and you go play it. And that's just how it is now. That's how it is in college football. And I got to thinking, as these conferences continue to expand, and as they have expanded, you don't even need further expansion beyond the point they're at right now to make this point. But as they've continued to expand, as you have conferences going to 16, 17, 18 teams, and then maybe beyond in the next few years, you lose some, whatever sense of fraternity might have existed already. And this is not new. This isn't new with Cal and Stanford and SMU joining. When Pitt was in the Big East, in those waning years when it was Cincinnati, Louisville, West Virginia, Rutgers, Syracuse, who else? Is that it? No, forgetting someone. Cincinnati, West Virginia, Louisville, Rutgers, Syracuse, South Florida, UConn, right? Everybody knew everybody. There was a fraternity there. Everybody had some sense of everybody. The great blog, Troy Nunes is an absolute magician, used to do the Octonian, where the mascots of each team would get together, and each one had a personality that very directly reflected that school and its sort of personality and reputation. And everybody who followed the Big East, who read that blog, could instantly recognize those characters, and you got it. You couldn't do something like that with the ACC right now. What the hell is, NC State? Like, who's Miami really? Who's Virginia? Who's Boston College? For a lot of those schools, who's Pitt? Who's Syracuse? Who's Louisville? It's a loose conglomeration of schools with no geographic connection, no real historic connection, at least connecting all 17 schools. They just happen to be together in a business arrangement. And this is not just, relative to Cal, Stanford, and SMU joining the conference. Pitt joined the ACC in 2013, so they've played 11 seasons in the conference. They've faced Florida State in the regular season 3 times in 11 years. They've faced Wake Forest in the regular season twice in 11 years. They faced NC State in the regular season twice in 11 years. They faced Clemson 3 times in 11 years. They faced Boston College 4 times in 11 years. You're not going to build any kind of awareness or recognition or familiarity or fraternity or whatever you want to call it. You're not going to build any of those things when you're facing a team twice in 11 years. They're not even in the same conference as NC State. Not even in the same conference as Wake Forest. You only have a little bit more history there because you faced them in the ACC championship game. You say you played them 3 times instead of 2 in your 2 regular season games. There's no real connection there. And even the teams in the Coastal Division. Virginia Tech, because there's actual history there. So no, you don't have that. You don't have any real connection to these teams. They might as well be non-conference teams. The results of those games just happen to affect your position in the conference, your standing in the conference. But Cal, Stanford, SMU, Wake Forest, Clemson, these might as well be non-conference games that just go on your conference record. And so I think Narduzzi's kind of getting at something like that. And if he is, kudos to him, because I think he's making a valid point. And it doesn't matter. It's not something you can bemoan like, oh, we've lost all the history and tradition. Yeah, we have. We lost it a long time ago. That's another reason the backyard brawl is as exceptional as it is. You got to cherish any of these rivalry games that still exist. You have to enjoy these things that are still out there, because there's fewer and fewer of them, and they're going to keep going away unless you can manage to get a few of these teams back together in conference, which, how are you going to do that? So I think that's what he's getting at. I'm not really sure, but I'm going to assume that is what he's getting at, because I think it's a good point and a good way to look at it. We'll do that more throughout the season. We'll take Narduzzi's comments and parse them a little bit. But those are a few things that stood out to me from what Pat Narduzzi said at the ACC football kickoff. We'll be hearing from Pat Narduzzi a lot over the next month and a week or so, the next 5 or 6 weeks leading into the season. Training camp is right around the corner. I can't believe it. Lots of Pat Narduzzi, lots of Pitt football, all right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com and Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. So like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, to never miss any of our Pitt video content. Don't forget, live show tonight, 8:30 p.m. with me and Jim Hammett. Looking forward to it. Hopefully you can tune in, and then we'll be back at you tomorrow morning with another Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.